Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you're listening to Watch This List Unplugged. This is a new episode of my Amy's Progress series, wherein I am attempting to become a better, more whole individual person. And today I have with me my dear friend, Lowe McKee, who suggested a film to me that I had seen not once but twice, and one that is kind of heartbreaking and what would you say, Lau? Existential for both of us. That I think is going to be just perfect for this venture.
I mean, I was actually kind of nervous to pick a movie or to help pick a movie for this series. So I was wondering if it was a good fit. I do think the movie does ask some like interesting existential questions, but I don't think everyone watches the movie and leaves with those impressions, or you don't have to.
So you think it's one that you could just sort of casually? It's kind of like a Coen Brothers film, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
like where you could read into it if you want, and there's deeper things going on, or you could just be maybe not entertained in this way because this is such a sad movie,
but also so funny,
but also very darkly funny.
Yeah.
Yes, like In Bruges is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which we both also really like too.
Yeah, so I guess we haven't said the name of the movie yet.
I know.
It's like anyone who's clicking on this
is already going to know.
Yeah, The Banshees of INISHERIN, Martin McDonagh's 2022 movie.
Yes, and another reason, so Lau had sent me a couple of ideas of movies that he thought maybe we could do. And then I thought, oh, well, this was also a connection to something that happened in your life experience, as well as being a movie that I really want to talk about, which is that you were Martin McDonagh's director's assistant for 3 Billboards. Tell us about that, Lau.
Sure. Yeah. I've mentioned in a couple of my Letterboxd reviews that I used to work in the film industry as a production assistant. And I got my start working on movies in North Carolina because they used to shoot a lot of movies in North Carolina, and that's where I'm from. So the third movie I worked on, I happened to be in Asheville, North Carolina, which is right next to where I grew up. So I was near my family, and the 3 Billboards came to town, and I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and I got hired to be Martin McDonagh's assistant on that movie. And it was the best job of my life. It probably will be the best job I ever had, because I got to watch a movie, being made from scratch up close. Got to see almost every take from the actors. Martin was awesome. He was super nice and really low maintenance and really kind. And he was nice enough. He knew I was interested in filmmaking, so he got me a headset so that I could stand by the monitors and watch the takes. Like I heard the same thing he was hearing.
Oh, that's so cool.
Which is not common to give to an assistant. So it was the coolest thing in the world. Yeah.
It's also so funny that like when you describe him, I think like, oh, like his movies are so dark and they have such, not maybe venomous is too strong a word, but his characters are kind of mean.
He goes to his stories go to some really dark places, but he's like, if you met him in person and you didn't know who he was, like he's just so laid back and chill and low maintenance, and he really didn't he was never mean. He never like yelled at anyone on set. He talked with everyone. He treated everyone like an equal. It was like a dream. It was like, because I was obsessed with In Bruges.
Yes.
And when I interviewed for the job, I went to Bruges because I love that movie so much.
Oh
like
my gosh.
I went to the city, and I went to like the bell tower and the place where you touch Christ's blood and stuff. But I was already like a huge fan of Martin McDonagh, and I'd read a couple of his plays because he's an incredible playwright. If you love his movies, you should try to see some of his plays or at least read them. And they always say, like, never meet your heroes because they suck, but he was awesome. Super cool.
It's so lovely.
Yeah.
And I love that he has the same actors in this as in Bruges. I mean, obviously Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson are in it. And then it's in a, I guess in Bruges is sort of a buddy comedy in a way, but this one's definitely more like a breakup movie. So actually, why don't you set this up for us just plot-wise briefly, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of this thing. And obviously we're going to spoil the whole film. So if anybody hasn't seen this movie, watch it first.
Sure. So the Banshees of Inisherin has a pretty deceptively simple premise, I think. In fact, like, so shockingly simple. I remember because I read like the trades and stuff, like IndieWire and Variety, so I always know like when a filmmaker that I like is going to be making a new movie, and I definitely keep tabs on what Martin McDonagh is up to. So when I read that Martin McDonagh is making a new movie, the plot is a period piece set on an island off the coast of Ireland about two men. One tells the other man he doesn't want to be his friend anymore.
Yeah.
And I remember I read that and I was like, huh. Is that a movie? And then I watched it and I was like, no shit, it's a movie. Of course it's a movie. You can make a movie out of anything if you tell a story truthfully. Mm-hmm. And it's actually, exploring a lot of stuff. And so the premise is so simple, but I think it works on so many levels because A, it's exploring a bunch of shit that we're going to talk about on this podcast, but also like people don't make stories about the end of a friendship like this. And it's actually a very real thing that we all hopefully you've never been through like anything like this in your life where your friend threatens to cut off his own fingers. But I mean, I've certainly had friendships kind of dissolve over time, or felt like maybe somebody I care about doesn't like me as much as they used to, or maybe I am the column in the situation and I'm trying to pull away from someone. Like, people change, time, like things change, like, and friendships are so important to us. And like, I feel like we don't make movies about friendship as much as we do about romantic relationships, but they're arguably just as important. So
I completely agree. This is something that I had a big revelation about when I saw Columbus.
Okay.
Where I was like, that's a movie about a platonic friendship. And not that it's like severe like this because it's such a quiet film, but it's the same thing where it's like, oh, I wish that there were more movies about people just becoming friends and not in the way that they're becoming friends so that they'll date.
Yeah,
but that it's just enough to just be friends. And
totally,
for that to evolve.
Yeah, because like that's something that we go through, and it's nice to see our experiences reflected in the art that we, we watch or read or whatever it is. Like, I like to see my life reflected up on the screen where I say, oh, this movie, it's like this movie sees me. I recognize this.
Right.
And there are certain things that sometimes you see in a movie and you go, oh, that's so refreshing because this is something I've experienced and I've never seen it in a movie before. And I think like talking about the dissolution of a friendship is something that you don't really see in movies much. And so that's one aspect of it that I really appreciated.
It's also, one of the things that's so common now too is like ghosting and how people just are too busy or disappear or, just don't make time for people anymore, but don't have what do I want to call that? I don't want to say self-awareness because that's too harsh, but like audacity to tell people why.
Sure.
And so I appreciate that about this film, especially is that as brutal as it is, it's kind of inspirational in a sense. Not that the way in which it's done, but the fact that someone actually tells the truth about why they don't want to hang out with someone anymore, because we are very bad at that as a culture. Just being honest why, like if you outgrow a relationship or you outgrow a friendship, oftentimes you will say anything except the reason that you're doing it.
Sure.
Like,
yeah. We don't want
to
to hurt
spare the
someone's
person's feelings.
or it's awkward and you don't people are averse to conflict. I'm certainly averse to conflict. I do not like conflict. It's something I'm constantly trying to work on, or at least aware of. I don't know if I'm always working on it, but and then this is what I want to dive in, and we'll get into this maybe in a bit, but like one of the things I love about this movie, and I saw, like, I kind of recognized in the reviews that I would read on Letterboxd, is that people would watch the film, and because it's not like a black and white superhero movie where one side is clearly bad and the other side is clearly good, people would leave the movie and sort of almost like pick sides. So it's like people felt more like they related more to Porik or to Colum, and how you felt about Colum's like harshness and bluntness in his reaction differs person to person. So I think it's an interesting thing to explore.
And it depends on who you have been, or if someone has been that way to you.
100%.
Because the people who in life would end something and be direct about it will, of course, support that. And then the person to whom that was done to them is going to be like, well, there was probably a nicer way or a better way to have done that. Mm-hmm. So I do like that too, that it kind of raises those questions. But I think you can see yourself in both. Would you agree? Like, I see me in both characters, Colin's and Brendan Gleeson's characters.
100%. I think the movie really resonated with me because maybe the reason I picked, or at least we picked the movie together to talk about on this podcast, but the reason why I picked that as one of the options to give you is because the aspect of the film that resonated with me strongest was the way that Colum and Porik represent, to me, opposite ends of a spectrum. And this is sort of the existential question that I think the film is one of the questions the film is asking, which is that, like, how can one lead a truly fulfilling and meaningful life? Mm-hmm. And on one end of the spectrum, you have Porik, who is someone who values and appreciates the simple things. He, like, at the beginning of the movie, when he's like, he walks and the rainbow is behind him, the movie almost makes him out to be like perfect. He's like almost enlightened, it seems. Like, it turns out maybe he's not. But like, he wants for nothing. He yearns for nothing. He doesn't need anything outside of what he already has. He appreciates the life he has. He has his sister, his donkey, his farm, his friend, the routine of meeting his friend at the pub for a drink. And he is totally content to live within that. And he doesn't want anything else. And there's something beautiful about that, if you look at it a certain way. And then on the other end of the spectrum, to me, Colum kind of represents, no, meaning and fulfillment come from striving for something greater, to working towards something, not getting stuck and stagnant in routine, and the turmoil that comes from the search for something greater than yourself, whether it's like writing a song like it is in the movie, or writing a book, or inventing something, or just doing something with your life, like having like forward motion. Those are the ends of the spectrum, like being content with what you have and then not being content with what you have and striving for something else. Like, what would human beings be without Beethoven and Mozart? You know, like, that's beautifully human to like, to yearn for something, but at the same time that can be dangerous. And it's also important to like value that cup of coffee you have in the morning when the sun is coming in through the window, like that. Like, why can't that be enough? You know what I mean? Like, that's Porik to me.
It's almost like Patterson versus Whiplash.
God.
I feel like
yeah.
I feel like that's what you just said.
It is basically, I mean, yeah, except like the funny thing is like, I think both of those films kind of like they present really interesting perceptions or like ways of living, but I don't think either of them work alone. Like I think Patterson is a really beautiful fantasy, but like I can't do that. I can't live that way.
No, but then Whiplash is also because Andrew has that speech at the table where he's like, he basically says the exact same thing that Calm says, which is,
I want to be remembered.
Everybody remembers Mozart. Everybody remembers, I think he's talking about who, Charlie Parker.
Yeah.
And the legacy, and that nobody's going to remember us in 50 years, but people will remember this. Just like Calm says, we remember Mozart. And then Podrick's like, I don't know who Mozart is. So that automatically discounts your theory.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, it is that sort of tension. I know exactly what you're saying between being content and being sort of in a Zen state.
Yeah.
And then that ambition, and that like wanting to leave something behind, wanting to be remembered, making a mark, contributing, even if you're dead.
So like asking that question, how does one lead like an actually fulfilling life? And I think the obvious and clear answer is like, neither. Find something in the middle, be a Siobhan and don't be a Column or a Porrick. Like, because, okay, so if you look at Porrick as a character, you can read him through a more generous perspective, which is that how beautiful that he's able to value and appreciate the simple things in life and he wants for nothing. And then you can read him in a more critical way, which is that Porrick is dull. He's dull. Sure. He's stagnant. He's stuck in routine. He lives in stasis. Nothing changes. And frankly, he's dim-witted. So most of us can't like exist in that like very simple happiness. We do need a little bit more. And then you can look at Column and you can look at him through a more empathetic sort of worldview and say like, oh, isn't it the most human thing in the world to like want to strive for something better and to like want to find like search for meaning and struggle and maybe make something great? Is that, I mean, what else is there? Like, that's movement. That's not stagnation. But then you can look at him through a more critical perspective as well. And you can say a couple things. One, he's like trying to grab hold of a rainbow and you can't grab hold of a rainbow. That's what rainbows are. They're like, it's very Irish that there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but it doesn't exist. He's doing something ultimately futile in that, like, he's searching for greatness. And at the end of the day, who gives a shit? Like, why not just be kind to the people around you? And also, like, that desire to leave legacy is, somewhat an exercise in vanity. Like, he just wants to be remembered, but why does that matter? So like, but then the reason why I think the movie is so existential is when I saw it, those themes hit me really hard because that's something I'm constantly thinking about. And like, to get a little personal, like, I want to be a filmmaker and part of me values or like desperately wants to be successful. And I moved to New York City 7-ish years ago to be a filmmaker with my brother. And we made a bunch of short films, and one of them is okay. Some of them aren't so good. We submitted them to film festivals. We kind of hoped that would start the ball rolling and that, like, this is going to sound ridiculous, but ultimately that we'd be the fucking Safdie brothers or we would be the Coen brothers. Like, that's our dream. That's what we're shooting for. And then, so we made these movies, we submitted them to film festivals. They got into like 1/5 of the film festivals we submitted them to. We felt like we were banging our heads against the wall. I started feeling really frustrated and stressed and doubting myself. And maybe I'm not actually that good at what I do. And, and then COVID hit and me and my partner were like, let's leave the city and let's lead a simple life. So I was like, let's be Porrick. Let's go move to this small town and not try and be involved in the rat race of like success and trying to make stuff. And let me like move to this small town and value having like a backyard, because I've been living in a tiny apartment. and let me value the quiet life more. And so I felt like I was turning off the column inside of me, and I was trying to appreciate the porrig inside of me. And now I'm constantly searching for that balance, because I think I've probably gone too far in the other direction. And like now recently I've gotten like much more active in like editing on friends' projects and stuff, and like trying to get involved again and trying to make something and be creative. And but I don't want to do it in an unhealthy way where I'm constantly striving for things that I'm not achieving, and then I'm, beating myself up about it. So thank you for allowing my therapy session real quick.
No, Lowe, this is very, I feel you, because I think what you're saying, or at least the way it strikes me, is it's not necessarily balance so much as alignment. Like maybe not being like there's this side and sometimes this one goes up and sometimes this one goes down and so on. Like you have a fulcrum and then you have, maybe it's that they need to come together. Like you struggle with having these selves that are disconnected. And if you could find a way to merge them so that they work together for you, like in alignment with who you are, that feels the most true to you, like that gives you the most energy, that feels the most natural, then the path would sort of just happen. I think the time that the path doesn't happen is what you're describing, where you feel like you're in a reality situation that's forcing you to choose one or the other instead of allowing for them to combine.
Interesting, because I have been thinking of it as a balance thing and not as an alignment thing. And part of the reason I think I have is because I sort of think of like the idea of living your life like column and the idea of living your life like porrig, like either valuing the simple things in what you have or like striving for greatness or whatever the fuck that means. I think of them as sort of like diametrically opposed a little bit. And so like finding a way to align them feels really hard to me. And like, I don't know exactly how to do that. And it's probably been like, it's like one of the things I talk about in therapy. It's like, like half the time I'm like, I'm just wasting my fucking life. And then the other half of the time I'm like, why am I trying to do this thing that makes me unhappy? Like, so like, I don't know.
Maybe for, I'm wondering like if it's more of a practical question on your end, like there's the desire to sort of be, and you talked about this even when we talked about like clear from 5 to 7, you talked about like death, you talked about like having peace and allowing things to happen. So there's that aspect. But I don't actually think, now that like I can hear you and I feel what you're saying, that they are at war with each other so much as that our personal growth is learning how to take useful things, useful qualities from both perspectives and make it so that our authenticity uses them as fuel, because it's always going to be a struggle, I think, when you see two things as mutually exclusive. If you can shift maybe the perspective that, no, I can actually take things from both of these sides, that would aid me, then it's just a matter of like, what do you want? What do you want from Podrick's side? What do you want from Colum's side? Which of those things feel real to you and which of them do you want to discard? Okay, if you like literally sat down and wrote them down, like these are the qualities that I want from this side, these are the qualities that I want from this. I still want to be a filmmaker, but I don't want to get burnt out. Okay, or I want to be content in what I do, but I don't want to be complacent. And then it's just a matter of like, practically speaking, how do you do that?
No, I think that's right. I think like You know, it's all about your perspective and how you choose to look at it, and like picking the aspects of both. Because there are good things about being more like Porrick, and there are good things about being more like Colum. And sort of the tragedy of the movie to me is the stubbornness of these two men, which are also like the stubbornness we have within ourselves to not recognize the other.
To reject the other, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, to reject the other. And
then there's no empathy in the movie.
I mean, like, I think at the end of the film, because we can talk about spoilers on this podcast, right? That's what we do here.
Yes, we can.
I think at the end of the film, Colum has changed in how he thinks about Porrick. But now Porrick is now the rigid one.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just it's just a beautiful and tragic.
Well, I was going to ask you. So this is something that I think is really key about this movie, is the scene where Colin Farrell's character stands up for himself, and they use it's kind of like a high school movie in a way, because they use the terms mean and nice a lot.
Yeah.
Which makes me feel like that's intentional in terms of revealing their maturity levels. Mm-hmm. If they're just saying mean and nice, it feels like they're kind of emotionally stunted in a way.
Yeah, for sure.
But he finally stands up for himself and then leaves. And then Colum's like, well, shit, like that was the time that I liked him the most. Like I actually feel like I like him now.
Yeah.
So there is this kind of shift. And I wondered this when you were talking. As you were talking, I was thinking, is it also that the more confidence we have as a result of pain or struggle or failure, that when we allow like our strength to come out, even if it's like in the face of injustice, that actually enables us to live a different way? Because if he had never rejected him, that would have never come out. So there's like all this dormant stuff within our personality that's sitting there and is like ready to kill it, but we don't have access to it because we're not in certain situations where it could even be revealed. So we don't even know a lot of times what our potential is, because we're not in situations where it could even be brought out. Like, what do you think about that idea?
Okay, so you brought up like the confidence of Porrig in that moment, mm-hmm. and that's what Colum maybe responding to. But I
think so.
Maybe, yeah. I think maybe along with the confidence, but not just confidence, I think there's a scene in the movie that to me like really explains why Colum cut off Porrig. And mm-hmm. It's a scene that Colum is not even in. It's when Porrig goes home and his sister's reading a sad book, and she says it's sad, and he says, "Don't read sad books, Siobhan, like you'll just get sad." And she's like, "Okay." And then she goes, "Don't you ever get lonely?" And mm-hmm. he says, "What the fuck is wrong with everybody?" And he leaves. And to me, that reveals so much about Porrig, in that he is not a person who likes to even recognize anything sad in life. Mm-hmm. He is someone mm-hmm. who doesn't like to dig in and think about anything deeply. And he's the type of person where if a family member of yours died, he would come to the funeral, and then you guys wouldn't see each other for 2 weeks, and then you'd go out for a coffee or something, and you'd be grieving, and he'd say, yeah, that was 2 weeks ago. So can we, you're still upset? Can we just move on? Can we go back to the way things were when things were just fun? He just doesn't deal with stuff. He doesn't dig in. And what Colum does for him when he cuts him off is he forces Porrig to face I don't know. Like, Colm says that he is someone who has despair.
Yes.
Porrick doesn't have despair at the beginning of the movie. Mm-hmm. By the time they have that confrontation, Porrick is openly dealing with despair, making him a deeper and more interesting person. Yes. And I think because now he is struggling and suffering, along with like being confident enough to like defend himself, Colm still sees something in him they didn't before. Clearly not enough to like try, and he's still rigid about, and that's the problem of the movie. He's so stubborn that he can't, like, he could end this whole thing by coming up with a compromise and being like, I need to write my magnum opus. I need space. We can still be friends, but like not like it used to be. But he won't allow that because he is as much of a man child as Porrick is. But yeah, I think it's like the inclusion of despair. If I was someone, and I am someone who I deal with depression, and I like, I can't be around someone who's so happy-go-lucky that he doesn't recognize any of that and gets annoyed with it. Like, mm-hmm. I would also not be able to be around a person like that. So
it's all about like being around, I think what the ideal is, or at least in terms of maybe personal growth, is to be around people who see reality and deal with it.
Yeah.
And what I mean by deal with it is that they are even interested. Because there's so many ways to flee from reality. Mm-hmm. And there's so many ways to anesthetize and just to be not present. And you don't even need like a substance or a TV show or anything not to be present. I could be not present with you right now.
Sure. Yeah.
So the goal is like, you want to be around people who can see, who want to, and who have an interest in not just like bettering yourself, because I think that can be kind of a slippery slope, but accessing yourself. Like, if I can strip away all of these barriers and muck, who am I? And then if you can do that, you can live in that. And that is so radically different than what I see, 95% of the time. It's like, we all want that, but what does that even look like?
Sure.
And what are the barriers personally? And I think the only scenes in which he even gets close to that are the confession scenes, where he even gets close to
Colm
the vulnerability required
with the priest. Colm with the priest.
Yeah. Where he's actually saying, I'm sorry for doing this. I feel bad about this.
Yeah.
That's the only moments of like where somebody is actually acknowledging their behavior, but also taking personal responsibility for it in a way that shows any regret at all, is when with the donkey. That's the only thing that he sort of confides in. And then
I guess so. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you see like a compassion and a kindness from him when Porrick gets hit by the cop and he helps him. There's still a care there in a way, but yeah, the only time he like verbalizes it is, I guess, in the confession booth with the priest. Which are great scenes.
I know. Yeah. How's the despair?
Yeah. Something interesting. So I watched like every interview with Martin McDonagh when this movie came out, so I know all the behind the scenes details. But
BTS.
Yeah. One thing I saw was Brendan Gleeson talking about in the rehearsal period. He was like, I need to find because Colm goes to such an extreme place in this film. I need to find like a real motivation to do this. And so what they decided on was that before the movie even starts, Colm's despair had gotten to such an awful point that he was ready to take his own life. And so the reason why he makes such an extreme decision at the beginning of this movie is because it's literally what he has to do to save his life. And so I think that says so much about his character. And I thought that was really interesting.
It's also very interesting that they made the fiddle be the thing that he felt the most passionate about, and like he was actually contributing. And then the thing he threatens to do is to cut off his fingers, which prevents him from doing the one thing that he feels he's gifted in doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost so like complicated and like hard to understand, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
because it's dependent on, it's almost like he's saying to Podrick, like, if you don't give me peace, or like he tells Siobhan he wants silence, basically, because she's like, what do you want? And he's like, it's just silence and a little bit of peace. He's basically saying, I'm going to hold you responsible for like killing my passion, like destroying my dream, basically.
yeah.
Like, I don't know how to emphasize enough other than to make you responsible for that. And he still doesn't get it, but it says more about Calm, I think, than it does about where Colin's head is at. I really think that this movie is about Brendan Gleeson's character way more than it is about
Oh, you do?
Colin's.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. I do.
Oh,
Because all the trajectory, like the arc, the way the climax, everything is hinged upon the suspense, the drama, everything's hinged upon Calm.
it is. Yeah, 100%.
Like, he is the what's the word? Not protagonist, but he is the like the impetus. He's the fuel, and then Colin's character is the reactive. He's only ever reacting until he puts his foot down and says, I'm going to burn your house down.
Yeah.
That's the only decision he makes that's actually moving plot forward.
Definitely. I think that he's passivity compared to Colum's action. But I would say that I think one of the most important themes of the film, and what we haven't talked about yet, is like, I think even though it's kind of like a very unusual, unrealistic thing that happens in this film, it's
Mm-hmm.
like a depiction of conflict, and the way that conflict between two parties can escalate to the point where two people who feel differently about something or who want different things end up in some form of conflict, and then there's feelings of hurt, and then feelings of anger, and then acts of retribution, and then more feelings of hurt and more anger and more retribution, until it spirals out of control, and eventually you pass like a point of no return. And you can see this in individual cases and on massive scales. We're seeing it literally in the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
The movie isn't necessarily like the perfect explainer for all of these things, but I saw like, oh, there's truth in here in the version that they're using. And this movie is about the journey of a man who generally was thought of as kind to a man who has lost all of that and is now burning with hatred. Like, hatred consumes him. And so like, I think more about that than I do about Column. So that's the other interesting thing about the movie, is like, when I read letterbox reviews, like I loved reading your second review of this movie, because your perspective on it was so different than what I came out with, because you were like, this movie is about cutting that toxic person out of your life.
Uh-huh.
So you're seeing it more through Column's perspective, right? Is that right?
Yes, like removing the person that you feel you literally would rather, like, you're about to hurt your own self. Like,
Yeah.
I see the cutting the fingers off as like taking an extreme measure where like you're in such a dysfunctional relationship with somebody that you can no longer hurt them. You start hurting yourself.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot bear it anymore, and it actually turns inward. To me, that's like, and then if you're trying to get out and like they won't let you out, or you feel trapped, that's kind of that energy that I was coming off of that time.
Totally. And that's the great thing about the movie, is that like, we can go in and we can leave with totally different perspectives, or thinking about different aspects of the film or different characters. Like, I personally relate to Porig more than I relate to Column. Like I like
you're nice.
Well, yeah, like everyone says, like I'm a nice guy and stuff, and like sometimes I'm too.
I don't mean it disparagingly.
Yeah. Well, sometimes like I think I'm too nice because I don't like conflict, and maybe I don't always like. Maybe it would be good of me to say like we were talking about earlier, like I don't feel like hanging out instead of like coming up with like a white lie. I definitely do that. So sorry,
low.
But like I do feel like, and especially like since I've moved to Gloucester, like I've tried to move away from like desiring success, whatever that means, because I wasn't getting it in like the short films we were making. Like I'm trying to appreciate the way of thinking about the world like Porig does a little bit. However, he is a fucking dimwit, and like I can't go that far. I can't just, because I also like to think deeply about things, and I have my own version of despair, like most of us do, like pretty much everyone, unless you're someone like Porig who can somehow like live without it. Like that's not very but I do. I think at least the first time I watched it, I was very much like relating more to and thinking more about Porig than I was about Colum, and thinking about the movie through the lens of Porig's journey than I was about Colum. I think the second time I watched it, maybe I thought more about Colum. That's the beauty of it.
And I mean, there's also all this stuff going on, which we haven't even mentioned, for like the political stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's there's Dominic's characters and Siobhan's characters, which
I love them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dominic especially not only provides like the much needed comic relief, because he's like, this is a depressing house, and like he just constantly says hilarious things where he's like, what's wrong with your friend then? And he's like, well, he just doesn't want to talk to me anymore. And he's like, what is he, 12? And like all of his responses are very viscerally satisfying. I feel, where you feel like, it feels like the truth is just being breathed into this thing, and in the most matter of fact, like Hal Hartley way, where it's just like, it's just said. And there's something very gratifying about that.
No filter. No filter on
no filter. Yeah. There you go. But he is also a very tragic character who is like being actively abused and has a terrible end, and like has a really, really sad scene with Siobhan. That's like heartbreaking. Yeah. Meanwhile, though, he, to me, out of everyone, seems like the happiest person, because it's not that he's like running away from reality. He knows how much it sucks, but he finds things in reality that he thinks will make him happy, and he goes after them. And even when they don't work out, he's like, well, there goes that dream. And it's sad to say, but at the same time, it's like, that seems very healthy to me, oddly.
Well, I think he says, there goes that dream, and then he's dead. So
you mean you think he kills himself because of that?
I think a big part of it, yeah.
Because I think it's because of his dad.
Yeah, I think maybe. I think it's like 90% his dad, but then the 10% push of getting rejected and feeling lonely. I do think the fact that that's the last moment we see him, and then the next time we see him, he's in the lake. I do think they are tied together. So I do think he's able to find happiness, but I also think it's hard to say. I don't know. I think.
Okay, so maybe, okay, I think you're right. Then let me say this addendum.
Yeah.
Then. If that weren't the end, I think that like the idea of holding on to things lightly, like pursuing what you think will make you happy, and then if you get rejected or it doesn't work out, you're not so clinging to it. And you're able to like keep your self-worth intact. And you can sort of say, well, there goes that dream, not in the way that maybe he does in the film, but in the way of where you can be like, this obviously wasn't for me, and that's okay. And I'm going to still do this. I'm going to still pursue things that I think I deserve. Maybe, I don't know. There's something to that resonates with me.
I mean, yeah.
That idea.
I think up until that, he is a character who's able to well, it's hard to say, right? Because he's able to like be in this. He's someone who's clearly usually in the moment because he says exactly what's on his mind, and it's always hilarious when he does.
Yes.
But then I think the fact that he does kill himself colors everything that came before, and it shows that like he is able to like let go and move on to the next moment and like laugh and be like, yes, I'm spending the night at Siobhan and Porig's house, even though he has bruises all over his face. There is something like he's in the moment there, but also clearly he's burying shit down because it all comes up eventually. So I do think there's something very beautiful in his character.
It reminds me of that guy in Crimes and Misdemeanors that Mark and I were talking about, the professor who kills himself. Yeah. Okay, well, there's like a professor who like says the truth about things. I just ruined that for you, didn't I?
You hate spoilers so much, so I think it's so great that you just did that. That's awesome.
I don't care.
It's okay, but I don't care about spoilers.
Oh well, thank God.
I just know you're so anti. Like, if I did this to you, you would be frustrated.
I would go crazy.
Yeah.
No, I would stop this recording right now and never speak to you again. Yeah. And I would tell you exactly why I wasn't speaking.
Totally. Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, it's kind of like where sometimes if you have or if you know a person in life who speaks truth and then you find out something terrible they're doing, does that discount the truthiness of what they say? Just because, so I'm basically saying if Dominic has more answers than the other characters do in the context of this film, does his suicide cancel out that or make it less?
No, I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't say that it does. I'm just saying, like, I think sometimes his happy-go-luckiness is not the full story. Like he's not, he's not, I don't know what I'm saying, but,
no, I know what you're saying. And maybe Siobhan
she's the healthiest in the movie by
the
far.
Most, okay. Then Siobhan is like a hybrid of like all of these elements coming together because when she confronts Calm at first, she's like, why don't you like him anymore? And he's like, because he's dull. And she's like, you're all dull.
Yeah.
Like every last one of you is dull. Like, what's your problem? Like, why do you think you're better than him just because he's nice? And then Podrick has that whole thing of like the importance of being nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe
so like that's where I think like if you were to think about the best way to try and exist in this world as a balance, I think she is the balance in it. Like she sits with the heavy shit. She lives with it. Life is full of it and you can't ignore it. Life is struggle. Life, like people you love pass, bad things happen to people. There's also wonderful things. She still has the capacity for kindness and forgiveness. The problem with Colm and Porik, especially at the end, is like neither has the capacity for forgiveness. Like Colm, I fully understand why Colm feels the need to cut off Porik. I don't agree with the manner in which he does it. I think it's too cruel. He's being deliberately cruel, and there is a different way to get what he wants without being so fucking rigid. And that's my issue with Colm. Porik is frustrating because he's not someone who delves deeply into anything, and that would get old. And he is generally a kind person. Clearly, he gets kind of twisted into something that's not, or in the wrong circumstance, he shows some sides of himself that he didn't realize he had. But it's about two man babies who just can't fucking talk about their feelings and compromise. And she makes a choice to leave, but she doesn't cut her brother off. She writes him letters. She loves him. She also needs to like be selfish in a way. She does something where like Colm is like, I need to be selfish and I need to make choices purely for myself, but he does it in a way that causes harm to other people. She's like, I need to move to the mainland and get a job because I need it for me, but she's not being cruel to anyone. So to me, like life is hard. There's no right answer, but like she represents the best way to move through the world that we see in the film, I think.
So what you're reminding me of is I read this quote yesterday that you just brought to my memory, which was, the only way to suffer is to focus on yourself. So maybe what distinguishes Siobhan from everyone else is that she's thinking of others first. And even her exit, like even her leaving, is not just solely for herself, because she wants her brother to grow up.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe she was a bit of a crutch for him.
Totally. Yeah.
And this is also a story of like tremendous self-obsession. Like these people, that's why I said that like a little while ago about the empathy factor. I don't feel like anybody even attempts to look at anything from the other person's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's what it comes down to. Like for the progress part of this is like, you're talking about conflict, and you know, that you wouldn't tell me your real reasons. You're joking.
I was joking.
At the same time, no, but still, Lowe, I think that, I mean, and I don't know if anybody would agree with this, it's not just like we as a culture are very sensitive, even though we are, and we get easily offended. We can get easily offended, and we are a little bit overly sensitive at times. It's like, how do we learn how to both speak the truth in love, but then also be able to receive rejection gracefully? Because it's twofold, right? Like, part of the reason I think we don't speak the truth lovingly or not to each other is because the other person doesn't receive it well. Like, there is no ideal circumstance to tell someone that you don't want to hang out with them. There's just like whether you want to confront it all or not. You know, I mean, there's better ways, but like the whole thing hurts, right? So it's like, my takeaway from this is like, how can I be the sort of person who can be rejected and it not just tank me?
Sure. Yeah.
Because that's going to happen, and there is going to be conflict, and it's going to happen all the time. So the mature response is not like, well, this is so unfair, why are you leaving me? It's, okay, like, I understand that this is the healthiest thing for you to do right now, and I care about you, and I'm okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a great premise for a film, because what he says at the beginning of the movie, like, God, nobody can, like, it's so hard for anyone to like receive that news gracefully. It hits our ego so hard when you hear that. And like, as much as I can try to preach like kindness and compassion or whatever, like if someone did that to me, I might react childly. I would probably react child like a child, like a piece of shit. I would lash out, and I would, you know, like it's such a human thing. It's such a human thing to react that way, and it's like really, really hard to respond to that with grace, I think. And that is absolutely something we all need to like to work on, and to we need to check ourselves. We need to check ourselves, and it's and you can preach it as much as anyone else, and I'm preaching it right now, but I'm sure the next time something happens, I'll probably not be my best self when I get that news, you know?
Lowe, you will, because you will remember
we talked
this
about this,
conversation.
because we did this. Yeah.
And I remember this conversation. It really is. It's also just like one of the things I'm learning in therapy, like you mentioned therapy, I'm learning that there are very few situations in life that you are supposed to react to, right? Like if your kid runs into the street and might be hit by a car, that's a situation where you react, right? Otherwise, you are supposed to always respond. And you're supposed to take a moment, center yourself if you can, whatever that means, like count to 5. People talk about deep breathing, but reactions always hurt you. Like the person who's reacting to the situation, it's going to hurt you, not the person that you're talking to.
Yeah.
So learning, and I think this is a skill. It's not natural. reaction is natural.
Mm-hmm.
Learning how to respond to situations, especially ones that attack your ego, make you feel bad about yourself, whatever, is so crucial. And I think the only way that you can learn how to respond is if you're actively working on your understanding of how valuable you are as a person. Because if you have that innateness, then you care enough about your well-being not to react. You're not there to like punish somebody for telling you the truth, because that's what it is. When we are reacting to people negatively, we're getting angry at them for being truthful with us, while also demanding that they be truthful and getting mad when people aren't truthful.
Yeah,
so
we're just the worst, aren't we?
We're just the worst.
Yeah, we're just a total bundle of contradictions, us humans. Yeah. No, that's lovely.
And
that's lovely.
Yeah. When you're on one side of it, you think it's completely justified. Well, you're like, well, I had to be honest. But then when it happens to you, you're like, why did they say it like that? That was mean.
That was uncalled for. Jeez, just lie to me, please. Say you're busy. You're too busy every time I text you. You know? Yeah, reacting versus responding. That's lovely. I hadn't heard that before. That's nice. I think you're right. I think you got to learn to respond. You need to take a beat, take it in, process it, and not just think about yourself, but think about this other person and what they're going through. Because if someone tells you they're feeling something, you can't say, no, you're not. You know what I mean?
And yeah, and they're also, if somebody tells you, this is the thing. You know how there's like the saying of like that apathy is worse than hate?
Mm-hmm.
Like if someone is bothering enough, cares about you enough to confront you, that means they actually want to reach you. Ghosting, ignoring, not talking to you, that's the true thing that you can't do anything with. If somebody is telling you the truth and it sounds harsh, that is so much more a compliment in a way.
Sure.
Because they are trying to connect to you even if it seems that they're not.
I mean, it's sorry.
No. Well, I was going to say, so maybe we shouldn't just assume that people aren't on our side. Like, if somebody's trying to talk to you and there's conflict, they're more than likely on your side. They just don't know how to fix it, and they're in pain.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the relationship in the film, that first scene, is so brilliantly simple and brutal. And, you know, like in some ways you can look at it like Colum is, he's doing something like refreshingly honest and sitting Porrick down and telling him this stuff. But man, is it so like Colin Farrell's performance whenever he's feeling hurt is just so brilliant and brutal, where he says like, you liked me yesterday. And then he's like, well, I thought you liked me yesterday, you know, like, or when he said, man, this, one of the moments that really gets me is when he says, do you know what I'm about to say?
Yes, I do.
Oh, let's see. It's when he goes over to his house and he's like, takes two to tango. And then he says, I don't want to tango. And he goes, you were dancing with your dog. And I was just like, oh my God, it's so funny and so succinct and so perfect. But he's just like the hurt. Was that what you thought I was going to say?
No, I thought you were going to say when he was confronting him and he said, oh God, maybe you never used to be. That's the saddest line for me, where he thinks like, oh, like maybe you actually didn't ever like me. You just hadn't gotten sick of me yet.
I mean, the thing is, like, it's good for him to learn that, because he didn't even know that his friend was so depressed that he was contemplating suicide.
Exactly.
Which means he wasn't being a good friend. So like, so it's a beautifully sad, but like necessary thing, you know?
Yes.
So
necessary suffering is the way that Richard Rohr puts it. It's that there is a difference between legitimate suffering that is there for your growth, like exercise, is, the suffering of your muscles but you're actually getting stronger, or like how people are with, just came to mind, like with their pets, where you will do things, or your kids, like you'll do things that are painful, but it's for their good. It's that sort of thing where you're going through fire, but there's a reason, versus, the type that just doesn't do anything. And for Colin Farrell's character, it's a little bit harder for him to learn from it. And I think ultimately he kind of doesn't. He's just vengeful, which is the tragedy.
Which is the tragedy of the thing, because this does happen. Like when these types of conflicts happen, people just get more angry and more hateful, and it's like the tragedy of it is that it is avoidable, but it's hard to avoid, and a lot of us can't. And this is why we continually run in, like, we're not a super enlightened species, us humans. We keep running into the same problems over and over and over again, when we have writers and thinkers who have said, we don't have to be this way. Here's a look at we can imagine utopia, but we can't get there for a number of reasons. And it's just like, it's so tragic that the movie ends this way, because it's avoidable. It's an avoidable thing.
And I think it's a choice, right? Like, that whole idea of like dying to self and allowing pain to be instructive is very counterintuitive. But if you can do that, then you can change. Like, it doesn't have to be where something tragic happens and that just like ends you. I do think that so much of the way that we interpret reality and perceive what's happening, I actually saw recently like a TikTok of Jim Carrey saying that he believed in like manifesting things, and what he used to think was, I want to see myself succeed in the future like this. And he would always be thinking like project himself into the future. And then he said the shift that he made in his life that changed his attitude completely was, instead of saying, I'm going to be like this in the future, he would say, the future's here, the future's here, the future's here. And there's a little bit of me that's like, you don't want to tell yourself bullshit. Like you don't want to be delusional. Okay. I'm not advocating positive affirmations in the mirror that aren't true, but I am saying that if you can sit here like in this podcast, and we can say what you and I are talking about is meaningful, and it was meant to happen, and it might make our day a little bit better because we connected and we got to talk, and we just believe that, the chances of that happening are exponentially higher than if we think that this was a bad experience. And that is completely a choice that we can make right now.
Totally. And it's sort of, how do I say this? I don't know if I could put this to words, but like, it is a choice, but sometimes it feels so impossible to make that choice. Like we do, like sometimes we can, it's just nearly impossible to think of anything outside of the perspective you have. And like what you're describing is like, we have the ability to change our perspective if we choose to. And I think that's true. I also think like it makes me think of the different movie called Oslo, August 31st. You've seen it, right?
Yes.
That movie to me is all about a man who cannot escape his own prison of his own self and his own perspective. He cannot, like, because everyone's telling him like, you have a reason to live, and he won't believe it. And for a multitude of reasons, he won't believe it. He's trapped in it. And I think like it's just a hard thing. Cause like, I think, yes, we do have that choice, but sometimes someone can tell you have that choice and it sounds patronizing. Cause it's like, oh, you're telling me I want to change the way I think. Oh, it's that easy. Okay. Yeah. I'm happy now. Blah, blah, blah. Like, I just think it's a mystery to me, because sometimes it is as easy as the flick of a switch. And then other times it feels like I can't get there. I'm trying, but I can't, and I don't know how. And so it's just like, but it's so
Lowe,
real.
I will
agree
say,
with you.
It's true though too that a lot of times we just make things so much more complicated than they should be.
Totally.
I mean, like sometimes literally like you could talk a long time about how hard it is to do X and like I'm trying and I'm blah blah blah. But if you just got quiet and like sat with yourself a moment and just made a sentence like, today I'm going to be grateful for this. And I mean, even those small moments, I know that they seem like it's baloney, but we just I don't think that we're trying as hard as we think.
Okay, sure.
I think that it's easier than we think at times, but there's so much pain. A lot of times there's so much in our way that sort of makes us feel defeated and not up to it and not capable. And it is really hard work to get to the point where you can even be grateful for anything. I have to actively practice gratitude. It's not something that just comes.
Same. Yeah.
But I do think that it's easier than we catastrophize and get like mentally obsessed with things that doesn't need to be so doomed.
Yeah. And you know, to bring it back to the movie, that's why it's so sad at the end in a way, is that they've given up. They've chosen this path. It didn't have to be this way. I have a question for you.
Okay, your one question.
I already know the answer now because we've had this nice long discussion.
Okay.
But I wanted to ask because I was sort of nervous to come on to this series because I don't think of myself as necessarily like much of a spiritual person. And I know that's such a big part of this podcast. And you sent me you were like, send me a list of movies to pick. And I was like, fuck, okay. I'm not very spiritual. Ozu, let's do Ozu. But we already talked about Ozu on our first podcast together. So when we both decided on this one, I was like, the main reason is clearly because we both like the movie. So there'll be like lots to discuss. But now I want to know, like, now that we've rewatched it, do you think that it was a good choice for this series? Because this podcast is called Amy's Progress. And it's all about, you know, I've listened to you talk about the rediscovery of your best self and, you know, trying to be a better person. And does this movie, do you feel like it resonates with your progress in any way? Do you think it was a good choice for this podcast?
Yes, because one of the things that I'm learning how to do, because I am putting myself in environments where I can hear different voices than I'm accustomed to, is how to keep your self-worth intact no matter what situation you're faced with. Because part of the thing about addiction and all of that is that you don't really like yourself that much typically. I mean, I have learned that, you know, it is a way to sort of not have to think about things, right? At least. And sort of put them out of mind so that you can get some sort of relief. But if you can find relief in reality and you feel equipped to like handle any situation that comes your way, that's the goal. Because reality is strong, especially when you're conscious for it, which I am now after 135 days. So with this film, what you're addressing and what you and I talked about is what is the most healthy or mature way to handle conflict, especially in a friendship or a relationship, in a way that doesn't just completely derail you and turn you into a worse version of yourself.
Totally. Yeah.
So if you and I have even like, I know this is just a gigantic topic, but it really affects all of us all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Because relationships ebb and flow. even if you don't end them, you know, or cut them off, there are like peaks and valleys to things. And people do outgrow relationships all the time.
All the time.
Or
people
at least
are always changing.
Like people are always changing, becoming interested in new things, having less time. And so, yeah, navigating how to respond in like, not like, that was mean, you hurt my feelings, is progress.
Yeah. And like, I mean, I would imagine, like, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't deal with the same situation you deal with alcohol and quitting alcohol, but like, if this is a situation where maybe 300 days ago, if you had gotten in a conflict like this, you'd go get a drink. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's how you would deal with it.
I wouldn't have even been in the conflict because I was drinking.
Okay.
So the conflict would not have, I wasn't dealing with anything that was happening because I was running from it.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have even known. Now I'm having to learn, when I hurt this person's feelings, it's actually not okay. When I act so selfishly, it hurts other people. Now, when those people tell me I'm hurting them, I can hear them, and I couldn't before.
Yeah.
So I'm having to learn, like, when someone says your behavior hurt me and this is such and such way, how do I even deal with that? I didn't know before. And I feel like that's more human to learn and be responsible for your own reactions and self, and you're learning how to talk.
You're doing the work. You're doing the work.
It is work, Lowe. Yeah. Otherwise we get this movie where people just like word vomit. You know, you're just kind of like flailing and you're like taking moment to moment and doing the best that you can, but ultimately you're so unhappy.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a great note to end on, Lowe, but I don't know what the upside to this movie is. What is if you had to take one positive takeaway, let's say that, what would your positive takeaway be?
Okay. Let's see here. Because what I kind of want to say is like, I think it's brilliant because it ends so tragically, and because it doesn't end in a positive way. And it is at the end, you're supposed to leave with your heart broken a little bit, and that you've watched this awful thing, because this happens in the world, and we need our art to reflect what happens in the world back to us. And so I think that I'm kind of sick of like happy endings in movies. We get too many of them. There's too much catharsis because something like we get plenty of it. I think catharsis is much needed, and we need and serves its purpose. But like, we also need the story to say not everything ends up okay, and things need to feel sad. Like, I listened to an interview with Tom York recently where he said like, people complain that Radiohead music is too sad. And my whole thing is like, if you're turning away from what's sad, then we've lost it, because that means you're not dealing with shit. That's sort of what I think he said. That's what I kind of remember him saying. So I think like it ends in a tragic way, but I need to leave that movie with my heart hurting, because it makes me think deeper about things. And it makes me think about my own life in ways that I can be different, so that I don't end up like that. And I think movies like that can help you check yourself.
Because it exposes all the ways that don't work. And that's actually truthful. That's
I
helpful.
think that it's a compassionate movie about people who don't show compassion. It's a movie about forgiveness. To me, like, I forgive both characters. Like, it's a movie about forgiveness where the characters don't forgive each other. Like, we're seeing the way not to do things. I think that's like Scorsese's made a career out of that. Is like showing the way not to be. But his movies are ethical movies about unethical people. You know,
like Schrader.
Yeah. And so I think there's a beauty in that, and it needs to be hard. And it, like, you know, and I texted you last night when I watched the movie, like, I haven't watched it since it came out, and I remember now because it makes my heart hurt so badly. But then when I watch it, I feel like, oh, that was the right thing to do. It was right to go through that and to feel those things and to not turn away from them. And so it's very much worth it. It's not as easy as putting on, I watched a really stupid movie called Please Don't Destroy the Legend of Foggy Mountain, which is premiered on, it's like the guys from SNL. I just watched it the other night, and it's dumb as shit. And that's needed too, But like, I feel so rewarded when I watch a movie like Three Billboards. And not Three Billboards, that's a good one too, but this one in particular. I love Banshees. I think it's his best movie.
Me too.
And it's rewarding because it's hard. It puts you through the ringer, and it's important. It makes me think about my own life, and that's why I watch movies like this. Just to think about my own life, and
it's what it's all about,
and other people, and how I can be with other people, and Does that sort of answer your question?
No, I think, and you just summed up exactly what I'm trying to do with the series. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. I just watched GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies. Those are completely pointless and fun, and they allow me to be silly and whatever. But at the same time, like, what I really love are like these sorts of films that hold up a mirror and you can look within yourself and then sort of say, what does this say about humanity, but what does this say about me? And maybe just be inspired to look within and be a little bit better. And I think that any movie that does that is a gift.
Agreed 100%.
Well, Al, this has been a pleasure. We can send each other a bill in the mail for our therapy session today. I hope that everyone has enjoyed, and we'll see you at the movies.